Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about book 3 in the Scholomance series by Noami Novik, which is The Golden Enclaves. I'm going to be doing this video in 3 parts. So basically it's going to be spoiler free for like the entire series, and that's going to be very short. And then it's going to be spoiler free for book 3, this one in particular. So if you've read the first 2 books but haven't read this one, that's the spoiler free part. And then for the last part, and probably the largest part, I'm going to be talking about my spoilery thoughts, where I kind of dive into specific things that happened, specific things that I liked and didn't like. So the Scholomance, if you don't know about it, is basically, it's a trilogy of books now. It is now complete. That is about a school for wizards. That's what the Scholomance is. Basically, there are no teachers in this school. The school itself gives you basically like an independent study type track, and it depends on what sorts of things you are trying to learn. So it's very self-motivated, but the students are motivated to do it because if you don't, then you're going to be murdered by monsters. So the school is full of monsters. They're called Maleficaria, or mals. There are all sorts of different types. Basically, the mals will try to eat wizard children because they want the magic that's inside of the wizard child, but they want easy food, basically. They go after the easy prey, which is young wizards who don't know how to use their magic yet to defend themselves. So wizard kids go to this school, and that's if you get a seat. It is a highly competitive school, and even in there you are likely to be eaten by mouths, but you have the best chance of survival and the best chance of becoming a powerful enough wizard to fight off the mouths if you get through the school. In this world, there are basically societies of wizards called Enclaves, and they make little spaces where you can live, and it is harder for Maleficaria to get to you if you're in an enclave, right? Because you're surrounded by fellow wizards. But enclaves are also extremely competitive, so there are a lot of wizards that are basically solo wizards, and they are more likely to die. So the dream of most wizards is to become an enclaver, to become powerful enough or to know somebody and make an alliance so that you can get into an enclave when you get out of the Scholomance so that you don't die. So in the first book, we meet Elle, who is a third-year student at the Scholomance. So she has one more year of high school, basically. It has like high school years. She is incredibly powerful, but the problem is that she can only do catastrophically powerful things. She can't do low-tier stuff. And the school will only give her spells with like mass destruction powers. So she's like, I want something that's going to get the dirt off of my clothes. And the school is like, okay, huge flamethrower spell. This is what you can have. And she really struggles with this, partially because that's not very useful. She needs like smaller level spells, and also because of mana. So basically for every spell that you cast, you have to use up mana that you can generate yourself or that you can borrow via a power sharer from somebody else. Usually only enclavers have power sharers. That's one of the things that makes them powerful, is that they all draw from a similar pool. But Elle is not an enclaver, and she can't really generate enough mana because how you get mana is you do things that you don't like. It's effort, essentially. So Elle generates mana by exercising because she really hates to be physically active. So she just crunches in order to get mana and that kind of thing. But basically she can't generate enough to use her spells most of the time. So she really saves up every little bit of mana that she can. Like, she could use some of those spells, but she doesn't want to burn through a bunch of her mana. It's a very precious resource. So she saves it up as much as she can. Now, Elle's family could join an enclave because it's basically just Elle and her mom. And her mom is a very powerful healer that a ton of enclaves would love to have. But for reasons that Elle does not understand, her mom always refused to join. Additionally, Elle does come from a family of wizards, but unfortunately, when she was little, she got a prophecy from her great-grandmother, I think it was. And her great-grandmother is a well-known, powerful seer who basically has never been wrong. Her prophecies always come true. They're always exactly hitting the mark. So she gives this prophecy about Elle the first time she meets her, and the prophecy is that she will be a destroyer of enclaves as she grows up. And so she is kicked out of the family, and they live basically on a commune. So that's our main character. Elle is a very grumpy, angry girl who is super frustrated by everything. And these books open up with her being rescued for, I believe, the 13th time or 11th time. Orion Lake saves her life. Orion Lake is the hero of the school. He comes from an enclave family. His parents are very powerful and well known, and he himself is an absolute powerhouse because his specialty is that he can rip the mana out of mouths and then use it to power his spells, which is an incredibly good ability. So he loves fighting mouths, and he is always rescuing everybody and using his special ability to save tons of students. And because of that, more students are surviving than ever before. And one of those students that is surviving more is Elle, because Orion has saved her life several times. And this enrages her. A lot of things happen in this book series due to Elle's rage. That is basically the premise of the series. I don't want to get into any more because that will start to get into spoilers for the series. But that is where we start off in the first book. I really enjoyed this series overall. It is very dark and oftentimes extremely gross, very grotesque in certain areas. So keep that in mind. This is not a YA series. It is considered adult, even though the main character is, a teenager. And I think the main reason for that is just because of how gross and dark it is. However, I think it's really cool. I love a lot of the lore. The writing style is very different. It kind of like touches stream of consciousness sometimes, and it's really fun, a really great series, and book 3 was my most anticipated read for the year. So with that said, I'm going to get into some spoiler-free thoughts about book 3 specifically. So this is going to assume that you have already read the first 2 books. It picks up right where we left off from book 2. Where Orion has shoved Elle out of the doors of the Scholomance that they're kicking off into the void with a super volcano, with Patience bearing down on them. So as you might expect, this book is mostly about trying to get Orion back out of the Scholomance, as well as dealing with the continuous rising tensions between all of the enclaves. If you don't remember, at the end of book 2, there seems like there might be an enclave war going on, because somebody is breaking the foundations of enclaves, and nobody really knows what's going on with that. They can only get, bits and pieces of information in the Scholomance. This deals with that, trying to find out who is the maleficer doing this terrible stuff. And then we also have, of course, Elle trying desperately not to become the prophesied nightmare sorceress maleficer. So in this book, we get a lot of great stuff. We have, of course, our conclusion to the series, but in the process, we also get a ton of lore about the world, exactly how certain types of magic work that we haven't been introduced to before, or that we have, but only on a surface level. We also get some interesting reveals about both Elle and Orion, and we get to meet some big enclave leaders, as well as get some returning characters from the previous books. You also get some big battles between wizards, as well as some big battles against mouths. Pretty much everything that you would expect to see in the conclusion of this series. I felt a lot of horror and disgust from certain moments, as well as a lot of curiosity and wonder. I read this book really quickly. I enjoyed it so much, and I think it is a great conclusion to the series. The pace was pretty much the same as the other books. If you have gotten this far, then you know kind of her pace, where events will happen, and then we get kind of a breakdown understanding of the lore and the world, and then the events kind of continue happening. It was that same sort of thing. Some moments were really heart-wrenching, and overall I thought it had some really amazing payoffs from things that were set up in the previous books that I hadn't expected to be set up in the previous books, but that came around in really great ways. If you haven't read this book yet, but you have read the other 2, I definitely suggest reading it. I think it's a very satisfying conclusion. And with all that said, now I'm going to get into some spoilery thoughts. So this book ended up being even darker than I expected, which is amazing because the first 2 are also incredibly dark. I was really surprised and disgusted when we got into the moment that hit the hardest for me and that continues to get to me, I just kind of wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, is the creation of Mawmouths. You know, with the slow crushing of a wizard into a eternally kind of living, digesting creature. That was horrible. I was so concerned when we got to that point and Lou was being, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that was the part that really I was like, ugh, and I had to like set it down and go do something else because it was just a little bit too much. And of course, the other really horrifying part was Orion's magical origin, how he is basically created around a very tiny mawmouth made of a fetus. I'm not 100% sure how that worked. There were some moments when I got a little bit confused about what exactly was the process for making that happen. Like, I kind of get how it works, but it was a little bit unclear. So if you have any clarity or ways that you interpreted it, please tell me. But I loved that. I thought that was such a great, dark origin story for Orion, and it worked really well with particular setups that we got from the previous books, because if I am remembering correctly, and I have said incorrect things before and I will do it again, but if I am remembering correctly, Orion was always really hungry in the previous books, right? So I thought that was amazing. And the fact that Elle's concern about Orion being so obsessed with mouths, that she was actually very right about that. The fact that she was like, this is weird, right? I am really glad that she was totally right. And conversely, in book 2, when Orion and Elle are going to go to bed together, when Orion is like no at first because he is worried that he will rip the magic out of Elle, that also ended up being a very valid concern. He could actually do that. I thought that was so good that we got that beautiful little setups for what's going on with Orion, and then the very disturbing payoff in this book. However, Orion's origin story is also kind of my biggest complaint about this book. Not the story itself, but the fact that it led into basically not getting very much of Orion in this book. Like, he was present, but he wasn't himself for most of it, which kind of makes him not present, if that makes sense. And Orion is pretty much my favorite character, so I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get more classic Elle-Orion interactions, especially because Orion and his bantery interactions with Elle was kind of one of the lighter elements of the book, and I think it broke up the darkness of the previous 2 books in really helpful ways. So not having that this time was a little bit challenging for me and a little bit of a disappointment, but I understand why it needed to happen. So in his absence, I really would have liked an additional lighter character. Like, I really would have liked getting a little bit more of a relationship built between Elle and her mom, especially because we had so much setup of Elle being this bratty nightmare child, and this really could have been a good opportunity for them to work through that and maybe have some lighter, perhaps even bantery type moments. Like, we did get some of that, but not as much as I would have wanted personally. When she's, healing after trying to fix Orion, we got a little bit of Elle taking care of her, and that was really satisfying too, this moment where Elle turns around and takes care of her the same way that her mom has taken care of her all this time. That was really cool, but I wanted more of it. Something else that I really liked was the inclusion of Liesel, and I don't know if I'm saying that name right. It's going to be on the screen. But the inclusion of Liesel and the relationship she had with Elle, where they're basically friends with benefits. Obviously, I am a huge fan of Elle and Orion, and I prize that relationship above all others in this book series. But I really liked Liesel as this kind of diversion, this kind of moment for Elle to feel a little bit better about the world. I think in some ways it kind of functioned as that lighter element that I was sort of looking for. Liesel is so snarky that she doesn't really, to me, fill that lighter character reveal. She's snarky in a way that doesn't feel as bantery. She's just very like, this is what we're doing. this is how it's going to be done. This is what has to be done. Not really snarky so much as brutally practical. And I really appreciate that about her as a character, but it wasn't the lighter element that I was looking for. And I really could have used that after that Maw Mouth reveal, with Lou being like slowly crushed. Like I said, I wake up thinking about it sometimes and I'm like, oh no, it was rough. I was reading it right before I went to bed, which was a mistake. I actually think this part was really well done because it feels kind of intentional, right? That usually after we get such darkness, we get a little bit of lightness, the lightness of El and Orion. And the moment where that should have happened, which was right after they finished building the Enclave, and then the wizards come in and they try to murder El, and then Orion shows up and stops them. There's Orion coming in with the save, the moment of levity, but it's not that this time, because Orion absorbed all the wizards because he's a Maw Mouth. I could have used the lightness there, but I really appreciate how we're kind of set up to expect it, and then those expectations were subverted by having an almost as bad moment with Orion absorbing them with his Maw Mouth powers and then leaving to go back to his Maleficer mother. At this point in the story, I was really thinking that Orion was not going to make it. I was even thinking that maybe that's what all the setup with Liesel was basically El forming a relationship, a romance with her instead. And that was going to be where the series went, that Orion dies and then El and Liesel end up together. I was thinking at the very least, Orion was going to lose all of his wizard powers. But then we kind of got a break from Orion and that because El goes and meets with her great-grandmother, the one who did the prophecy. And I really enjoyed this as well. It kind of worked in the way that I was thinking that it was going to, where the prophecy is that El is the destroyer of enclaves, but it's only because she's making them better. And that was kind of true when we get the reveal that all enclaves are built on the power of Maw Mouths, and so El destroying them causes the foundation of the enclave to collapse, and El is, in fact, the Maleficer doing this. She just didn't know it, because nobody can kill Maw Mouths except for El. I really enjoyed all of that. I also really enjoyed the fact that the grandmother actually knew that this was going to be the way that things turned out, that she didn't have this terrible opinion of El, but basically that this is the only option that didn't cause her to land in Ophelia's lap. Ophelia, of course, being Orion's mother, and that's how we would have gotten El, the big bad Maleficer, as if she had been found and taken by Ophelia. I felt like the final fight was fantastic. The lead up to it was a little bit, felt like could have been sped up a little bit. I really just wanted to get to the showdown, and that whole moment of them being lost forever was a little bit draggy for me, but I understand again why it had to happen that way. And I really enjoyed Elle turning people to stone temporarily as a way to not kill them, and her ability to catch spells and return them as something else. That was really cool. I loved that so much. The final fight itself was great. It made a lot of sense to me why they would do it this way, where they set up their big, instead of having like full, bring all the wizards, you just bring your heavy hitters, and then they basically represent your enclave. So when El murdered Orion after his heartbreaking relief at seeing her and knowing that he was going to have somebody kill him, I loved this moment for a lot of reasons. The Orion-El relationship, that belief that I can trust you to stop me from being this horrible monster when I can't trust anybody else to do it. I love that dynamic so much, and so I really loved that moment. Also, when Elle did it, when Elle killed him in that very gentle, heartbreaking moment, when she killed him and everybody was chanting for him to stay, putting their magical energy into that request, belief, command, that faith, bringing him back, I really thought that he was going to basically become the new foundation for the Scholomance, and that he would still basically be dead, but that his spirit would have been infused in the school, making it a safer place. Or I thought he was going to become attached to it and never be able to leave it. And both of those endings would have been really heartbreaking, but I kind of thought they would have been cool. I like the ending that we got more, obviously, but that's where I was thinking that it was going. I also feel that it would have been really on theme for this book because this book is not exactly known for happy endings. But with that said, I actually really love that we got a bit of a happy ending for this one. Like, obviously, there are more problems in the future that Elle and Orion will have to deal with, but that Orion got to live and gets to keep his powers, but isn't at the root of him. He isn't a Mawmouth anymore. But that in doing all of that, Ophelia still gets her way. I really like that we got this good with the bad together. And I absolutely loved that last line. It was actually a bit nice. This is such a nice moment for me because Elle has been so angry and disbelieving this whole book series, getting her turn from being somebody who basically doesn't believe in nice things, who basically distrusts any possibility of getting a moment of peace. Finally, she gets to have it. Finally, she gets to settle into this moment of just enjoying being with Orion. For example, when her and Orion were together previously, it was like, well, we might die at graduation, so we should do this enjoyable thing now. When she was with Liesel, it was like, I don't know how to function as a person and you help ground me in the moment. But this felt more like, I can trust in this. I can believe in the possibility of positivity in the future. And I absolutely loved that for Elle. I love that Orion and Elle get to be together, even if it's not all of the time, because Orion is going to pursue his dream of being a hero for the Scholomance and keeping all those kids safe going forward. Yeah, overall, it was an amazing book, even if it was a little bit more horrifying than I expected. I do feel a little bit like I have to read exclusively wholesome books for a while to kind of recover. But I absolutely love the series. I love the lore. I do look forward to rereading it sometime, but definitely when I'm in the mood for something a little bit darker, just because that's the vibe of this. Definitely high dark academia vibes. And I absolutely loved it. That's pretty much everything I have to say about this series. I think it was wonderful. It was a great conclusion. It felt on theme and not rushed, very planned, very deliberate the entire time. I absolutely loved it. And it did not disappoint at all as my most anticipated read of the year. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble on about these books. And have a beautiful night, universe.